the recruitment system, and on their current talent priorities. What are they looking for? We know we have another WebEx coming up, a specialized WebEx on the 2nd of May on the Young Professional Program YPP on the 2nd of May at 9 o'clock. So stay tuned on that, but we will briefly touch on that as well. And now with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our colleagues from the Office of Human Resource Management. They are from the Strategic Planning and Staffing Division. Anje Schubert to my left, or from your side to the right. Eva Jansen, and they are joined by colleagues Kenny, Valentin, Ulrika, and Emily. So with that, I'm handing over. I just also wanted to mention that our colleagues from the Center's Operations sections are here. We have Travis, our HR guru here, and also Akiko. So if you have specific questions that relate to ICS, we can table it later and they can address it, or if it's something that can quickly be addressed, we could, Travis, you can maybe sit on the table here too and you can address it as well, or if not, we address it later. Because the aim here of this briefing is really to give you an overview so that you are better equipped to brief your audiences and answer questions or refer them to the right resource, the right person, the right website. Anja is going to speak about 15 minutes, and then Eva will say a little bit about the YPP, and then we will open for question and answers. And since there's so many of you, we will do it via chat. So with that, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much for introducing me, Helene, and very pleased to be able to speak to you today. Just let me also tell you that a very long time ago I passed the NCE in public information, so I do consider myself a colleague of yours. I used to work for a long time in communications and PR before I joined the UN, and then as things go, your life in the UN Secretariat always develops in a little bit unexpected way, and now I mainly work in HR and administration, public management. So. But I do feel a very strong connection with communication, so I really want to talk to you also about how we can work together and how we in the outreach unit can support you in communicating with your external audiences. So we do have a little PowerPoint presentation, a couple of slides that I want to go over and talk a little bit about what are the types of career at the UN. You probably know a lot already about that, but I also want to highlight some of the talent gaps that we have. So we're not just looking for quantity and application, but we're really looking for certain profiles, and we want to fill the current gaps that we have. I'm going to show you some of the communications tools we have so that you are aware what you can use in your own work and how we can work together. And if we can at the end talk a little bit about, perhaps your views on, what your needs are, what kind of products you would, like to have from us. We can think about it together and also, come up with solutions that work for you in communicating careers to to the audiences in your region. So if we start off on the first slide, the next one. So I just want to start off really with who we are and where we are, and I think that's an important point always to make to applicants or to people who are interested in the UN. We have 40,000 staff globally. So the United Secretariat, the United Nations Secretariat really is more than a headquarter duty station. As we used to be many years ago, we have changed a lot, and we are now more a field-based organization because more than 50% of our staff members are today working outside headquarter duty stations. So in communicating with potential kind of interested people, young people, our focus now really is also on highlighting opportunities, job opportunities that are outside headquarter duty stations, that are in field operations, in special political missions, and so on. Out of the 40,000 staff, I don't know if you know it, or maybe you know it, we have about 13,000 professional staff members. Yeah, so this is the kind of the types of positions that we have at the professional level. And then, of course, we have a lot of staff members on positions who work at the national levels, at the general service level. So there are a lot of opportunities, and we do have a number of kind of what we call job networks, and you will see that on the next slide. And the reason I'm highlighting this as well is because we have changed that a little bit. We have changed the job network configuration with the implementation of a new staffing system. So in talking to audiences, we do highlight the 9 job networks that we have in the Secretariat to kind of show people what are the opportunities for them, in which fields they can work. And basically, when people ask, what is it they can do at the UN, it's pretty much everything, really. So you can be a pilot in one of the African missions, or you can work in trades, or you can be a legal officer, or you can work in the office for outer space. So it's really the Secretariat offers every type of opportunity, not just in political affairs. A lot of people outside think of the UN Secretariat in terms of, negotiation, conflict resolution, maybe humanitarian affairs, electoral affairs, but we do have a lot of jobs in IT. We have a lot of jobs in HR, in administration, and of course public information. So it's important to kind of highlight the diversity of job opportunities to applicants. So you get the presentation also, so you can have this. We often hand this also out as a kind of fact sheet for applicants to understand, what are the kinds of things we have in terms of jobs in the UN. So let's go to the next slide. A question that probably you get very often is, how do I enter the UN? How do I start a job with the UN? And as you know, we have a lot of different types of ways of joining the UN and different levels, and you can see them in front of you. Of course, we have the general service and related categories. A lot of people join the UN through that pathway. We have the about 13,000 positions at the P2 to the D2 levels, for which we require already substantive, professional experience. We have the YPP, the Young Professional Program. We do have quite a lot of junior professional officers in the Secretariat, mostly sponsored by member states who are participating in the program. So it's not really for every country, but it's only for nationals from the participating countries who sponsor JPOs. We have the language competitive examinations. We do have many temporary job openings, which is sometimes also a good pathway into the UN, and we have consultancies. So there's a lot of different opportunities of joining. One of the questions we get very often from younger people, and I suppose you interact a lot with universities, with students, with young people who have no professional experience, is often a little bit frustration we encounter about, how do I join if I actually don't have much professional experience? For the P2 level, we require already 2 years of professional experience unless people go through the YPP, and for the P3 we require at least 5 years of professional experience. Because the current climate in the world is such that it's very competitive to find a job as a young person, we actually do have a lot of applicants who have a lot more experience when they apply. So very often we see applicants with 10 years of professional experience to applying to P3 positions. So it's something really to keep in mind a little bit when you talk to applicants. We often recommend to young people to, join an NGO, to work somehow internationally when they finish university, and to look at the UN Secretariat as a kind of long-term strategy in joining the UN, not to really focus only on, trying to get a job after they finish university, because most likely that's not going to work out straight away unless, of course, they are successful in the YPP program. So we kind of, what we would like to ask you to do is really inspire young people and anyone else, of course, to pursue opportunities at the UN, but also to, build it into kind of their long-term career development planning. A good way of getting a sense of the UN, of course, is the internship program. we offer internships at all family duty stations. So we do encourage young people to pursue internships, not just in New York, Geneva, Vienna, because of course that's more cost intensive, but we have internships in Addis Ababa, in Nairobi, Entebbe, Kinshasa. All these are family duty stations, so also for people who are financially perhaps not that equipped, there are opportunities to do internships with the UN and to kind of get into the system to learn more about it, to get the exposure. And there's also an option for online volunteering through the United Nations volunteers. So we would also like you to really highlight there are even opportunities to learn about the UN and to work with the UN online from home. So there is really a very broad range of opportunity, from online volunteering to potentially being a D1 at some point in your life in the organization. So it's really about navigating all these different options and for you to be a little bit familiar with the types of entry points to the Secretariat. So in terms of, if we go to the next slide, what are really our talent priorities? If we think about what kind of talent do we want to have in the Secretariat, we do get many, many applications. And I think it's important for you to know that if we think about a P3 officer, I suppose in DPI, a public information officer, I would think easily 800 applications. So just think about the competition and do a little bit of expectation management, inspire people, but also be realistic a little bit in guiding, the people you speak to. So perhaps it's better to consider the P2 public information officer position in UNAMI, in a mission to kind of start a career and then move somewhere else. But anything that's in headquarter duty stations is highly competitive. It's always going to be around 800, 900 more applications at the junior levels. Of course, we have less applications as we go higher up, but that's really the picture. And we are now, with the new Secretary General, also have an increased focus again on geographical and gender balance. And these are the two kind of priorities I would really like to impress on you today, is help us address un- and underrepresentation at the Secretariat. For those of you who have access to these countries that you see listed, you will receive the presentation, so you will understand the 61 countries that are currently un- and underrepresented in the Secretariat. And these are really our priorities. We want to reach out to nationals from those countries. Some of them are very small and specific, but we want to encourage more applications, more qualified applicants, good applicants from these countries to apply to jobs in the UN. So if we go to the next slide, we have our other priority. With the new SG, gender parity is one of our main staffing objectives, apart from geographical balance. And what does it mean? It does not just mean overall aggregated parity within the Secretariat. It means we are looking to have equal representation of men and women at each grade level, so in each department. So that's a little bit different from before, where we had a different methodology when we looked at gender. So now our goal is to have, 50-50%, 50-50 representation at the P5 level. In DPI, for instance, DPI is, I think, it doesn't have such a gender issue, because traditionally there is a lot of women working in communications. But if we look at other job networks, for instance, IT, we have only 20% of women represented in what we call ITechNet, the IT and telecommunications job network. So, and another issue that we're facing in staffing is really equal representation of men and women at the senior levels. So, you know, if you do interact, you know, with your host country counterparts or with trade associations or professional associations or women's networks, please do highlight to them that we are looking for women at the senior levels, P5, D1, D2, where sometimes they also don't have an internal pipeline, which means we have to look at external talent. And at this stage, when we look at a D1 level, we have only 20% of the applications are women. So that puts us not in a good position to actually create that pipeline and get, you know, arrive at equal gender representation. So just to let you know, the SG also has convened a task force on gender in the UN system because he's very serious about it. So he wants to achieve gender parity in, you know, in the missions at the DRSG, SRSG level by 2021, and he wants to achieve gender parity for the UN system by 2026. So in the coming weeks and months, you will see more communications coming out also from the SG directly talking about this. All of this, of course, is aligned with the SDG 5, which is about gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. So I just wanted to highlight that to you. Also, that means that if we look at women as a talent pool, there are a lot of opportunities in field missions, because traditionally representation in the field is even less equal than at headquarter duty stations. So these are some of the things you can highlight. You know, when you speak to your applicants, direct them a little bit. There are certain networks where we always have gaps. For instance, logistics is very hard to find people. Judicial affairs is very hard to find people. IT in the field. So I'm just kind of trying to highlight to you a little bit that when you speak to people, kind of focus a little bit where the opportunities are greatest. Because we don't want people to apply a lot and feel very frustrated. We see on our Facebook that, you know, people apply, but they don't hear back and they don't know why. So we're trying to give a little bit more strategic guidance to our external audience, and it will be really great if you can help us with that. So let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's new really in staffing, because you may be interested in this and you may have heard about it. It doesn't really impact the public information talent group at this point, but you may have heard that we have introduced a new staffing system, which is called the Staff Selection and Managed Mobility System. So what that new system really entails is we have now a mobility requirement for staff members who are serving at the FS and professional and above levels. So that is something that applies to a certain category of staff in the UN, FS, MP, and above levels who are serving on, you know, what I would call regular contracts. But when you speak, you know, to your audiences, it's important to tell them that when you join the United Nations, you join an international public organization, and you will be required to change your job every couple of years. Yes, so there are now position, you know, occupancy maximums, as we call them, in New York. The public information officers will, you know, serve for up to 7 years in the same position, and then they will be required to move to a different position unless they have already done so. So I don't want to talk too much about this because we have a number of webinars that we offer on the new staff selection system. So I will provide Helene also with the link. This is something that we run every month. We have, I hold some of the webinars and we explain to staff members how this new staffing system works. So for you at this point, just to know that we have 2 job networks out of the 9 that I showed you in the beginning that are part of the new staffing system, which is PolNet, Political, Peace and Humanitarian, and ITechNet. So ITechNet we're phasing in this year, PolNet last year. Your HR experts know everything about this because we briefed them already. But what that means from an applicant perspective is that instead of advertising jobs on an ad hoc basis, we are now doing semi-annual posting of jobs. So if you speak to people who would love to work in civil affairs, political affairs, anything that's in the PolNet or this year in IT, we will be advertising twice a year the positions that we collect. So it's going to be a little bit different because, you know, your people you know may go to the careers.un.org and say, oh, but I never see any political affairs officer jobs. That is because we only advertise them in a batch twice a year. So it's very different. So if they don't see something, it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just coming at a later point. But we are also communicating, you know, when we advertise positions. So just have that in the back of your mind in terms of how the system is changing. We will be phasing in the system in the next couple of years. So hopefully by 2021, all the job networks will be covered by the new staff selection system. If you're really, really interested in how this all works, I would suggest come to one of our webinars. We also have a webinar on the new standardized assessment process. So if, you know, from an applicant perspective, that is also something that people really, you know, want to know. We're introducing standardized assessments. We have already for PolNet. It's a very new way of doing the assessment process. So, but I'm not gonna, if you have questions, we can, you know, talk about this. We go to the next slide. Just a few things I want to tell you what we often see and what causes frustration with people. So, you know, when I say that, let's say we get like 800 applications to a job, very, very often only half of these applications actually meet the minimum requirements. So if you speak to people who say, but I never hear back and, you know, I have sent in 100 applications, then the first really question is to ask, you know, are you making sure you're meeting the minimum requirements of the position you're applying to? It sounds very basic, but, you know, we require a minimum of 5 years for a P3 position. If the person only has 4.5 years, the Inspira system will already not let the application go through. So we know that other organizations, you know, are more flexible. They hire on potential. We don't do this. We have a large volume of applications. So if people don't meet the minimum requirements, the application simply does not go through. And there are a lot of mistakes applicants do in the application. We very often see there's almost no information. The hiring manager can actually not make any kind of conclusions about the relevance of experience because there's no text in the application. Half of the boxes are not ticked. You know, a lot of people don't indicate that they speak English. The system does not let the application go through. So I just want to tell you this because we see it on this end. We see the applications and we see that there are very basic, frequent mistakes that I think you can have also people, if they have questions or if they express frustration, have them to explain that. So on the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about, what you can possibly do, but of course it's not for me to tell you that. It's just what I'm thinking. So so you can tell us, what you can do and how we can support you. So really, I think one of my key messages was, focus on quality, not quantity, when you speak to applicants. Help them to a little bit navigate the system, so we can also save their time and have them apply for the right jobs and so on. Manage a little bit expectations of your clients. The applying to a UN job is kind of sometimes a long-term endeavor. All of us know that it can take quite a long time to receive an answer. Our recruitment process takes long. Our kind of ideal scenario timeline for recruitment from beginning to end is really half a year. Yeah. So help us a little bit to kind of manage the expectations of people, focus on the talent gaps that I talked about, really help us to address geographical and gender balance. This is also where applicants will have greater opportunities. Help us, to distribute the communications materials we have. I will show to you what we have. Help us to drive traffic to the uncareers.org and to our social media, where we engage also on questions with applicants and with external audience. Also, we would be really grateful if you can, once in a while give us an update if you are invited to career fairs, or if you're taking, if you're participating in career discussions or workshops. We can always provide you with the latest materials we have, with the latest presentations we have. We would love for you to use our presentation materials, so you really have kind of the most up-to-date information. So we go just to, I just have two more things. You know that we have the all jobs are always advertised on the careers portal, but we're also using now increasingly social media. So for instance, yesterday we had a Facebook Live with Eva and her team on the YPP 2017. So one of the things we want to have more collaboration on is how can you help us spread the message and reshare information that we have on our Facebook page, that we have on Weibo and on Twitter. We are also working with the DPI social media team. So we will be using their Trello hub to propose to you our social media contents, so that you can use it to share it in your social media. On the next page, I'll just show you a little bit, a couple of flyers we have. We will be sending you the PDF versions so that you can, print them out, or you can distribute them digitally. This is the latest set of products we have. And I think I leave it here. We did actually, in preparation of this meeting, analyze a little bit your social media presence. If you go to the next slide, we did a little bit of an review of the social media that you have, and to kind of see which units are actually kind of in the vicinity of our YPP priority countries. And of course, those units we would really love to participate in the YPP session, and then also talk a little bit about how we can work together in reaching nationals of the YPP focus countries, which are of course also then focus countries generally for underrepresentation. That's it.
Thank you so much, Anja. Very informative and I think very relevant to our work in the UNIX. Anja, Eva, I don't know if you want to say a few sentences about the YPP now or later.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
I think even as a colleague from HR, it was a wealth of information. So I think we all have to take a deep breath and maybe take some questions first, and then I'll say some more sentences about the YPP. Is that okay?
Perfect. Great, thank you. Really very, very interesting. And I think the presentation is very valuable too. Maybe I just start with one question, and there are questions that came in already and that you sent. The material that you are showing, which is very useful because you can't explain all this usually when you have a few minutes. Is it available in English only, or do you have it also in other languages?
So we are currently translating into French.
Okay.
So our aim is also, of course, under the multilingualism policy in the Secretariat to have everything in English and French. But it's a little bit, we have to work with DGACM, but we'll be sharing everything in English and French.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then also maybe just, if our colleagues, and this is now an appeal to our colleagues, if you do translate something in a language, please share it back, because then, let our colleagues know. So I think I'm going to some of the questions that you had sent in. One was related, there were quite a few related to the quota system. This is from our colleagues in Accra, how can young graduates work with the UN? Is there a quota system for citizens of member states to be employed within the UN system? And you already mentioned that in a way, but how someone here also in Sudan, I think, said what is the criteria followed to identify countries that are underrepresented? My colleague in Sudan basically said that Sudan is a country with 2 of 16 missions. There's a large number of Sudanese employed, but they're mostly at the national level. Very few are international staff. So he is also asking about the criteria. And so maybe,
okay, I'll jump in right away. Unfortunately, I didn't bring a little paper which I prepared, but which I could send around about the desirable ranges. There is no quota system per se, but it is part of the Charter of the United Nations that our staff should be hired from an as wide geographical basis as possible. And the system of the desirable ranges has been established in 1962 by the General Assembly. What is that exactly? I think everybody has this question the whole time. How does it work? A certain number of posts have been put into a pool, which is the basis for this system. And according to several criteria, the General Assembly has decided that certain posts out of this pool will be distributed to member states. And the criteria for this distribution is very well defined in various resolutions, but basically we have 3 main points. One is the membership to the Secretariat of the member state. The other one is the population factor, which is the population number in comparison to the population of the overall pool of the other countries. And the third one is the contribution factor. So how much does the individual member state contribute to the regular budget of the United Nations Secretariat? And because we have a number of countries that in this system are or underrepresented, and what does that mean? They don't fall into the range of posts that has been attributed to them, meaning they don't have enough nationals sitting on these specific positions. So they qualify as underrepresented, or if they have not a single national on such a position, they're unrepresented. Now the General Assembly has thought about what can we do against this. We should help those member states to be a little bit better represented. And this is why the YPP was invented. So the YPP examination is offered only to and underrepresented countries. They do not have to participate. They're invited to participate every year. And obviously also the and underrepresentation changes every year. For example, if we get new nationals on board, then this country might be all of a sudden in range. Or if a lot of people retire from one year to the other, they might be under or even unrepresented. So this is why we have those target countries for the YPP, and in particular countries that have struggled for a long time. for specific reasons, like for example, in the past we had the exam only paper-based, which meant that we had to open an exam center. And who opens this exam center? It's the member state, it's not the United Nations. But the United Nations Secretariat sends an administrator to oversee the exam. And financially, that's only worthwhile if we have a certain number of candidates sitting for the exam, and that number was defined as 15. So the moment there was a minimum number of 15 candidates, we would open an exam center, send an administrator. And very often when you sit in a small island or a very small country, that just doesn't happen. So we really try to help those particular countries. So then, you know, what happens afterwards, everybody competes against everybody, and the best ones are placed on the roster. And then from the roster, there happens a selection that is being done by the managers themselves. So there is a vacant position. The manager approaches us and says, we have a vacant position. Can you send us the list of roster candidates? And then the manager goes through the qualifications, the resumes, and sees who would fit best. And at that point, there is no looking at the nationalities anymore. A YPP is a YPP. They're successful, they should fit. And so at the selection point, in terms of YPP, nobody looks anymore at a quota. Now, my son asked me yesterday after the Facebook live thing, he said, I don't understand this. I thought all the posts in the UN somehow have something to do with the geographical distribution. And I told him, yes, obviously, and this is what Anje explained before, the geographical and gender distribution is important, but there are no quotas foreseen. So if I'm a manager of an office where I have already 2 German speakers, or 3 even, you know, Austria, Germany, Austria, then I will think twice.
Yeah, we are not really representing the geographic diversity.
And all women, actually.
At least I'm not blonde.
Yeah. Then obviously, you know, I will think
Gender
twice.
we're doing well.
Well, I'm not sure where's the man here, right? So yeah, so you know, then I have to really look into how am I doing in my office, and even if nobody will complain, it has become an issue, and we're really all very aware of it. And if there are 2 candidates who are equally qualified, I will for sure look at the right gender and at the right geographical distribution. Sorry. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think that's excellent. Thank you so much. There's a question now on internships from Roberta in Rio. We shape the internship to our reality, and we would like to have multicultural staff. Is it necessary that the intern speaks another language? Otherwise, we can be very elitist, having only people who can afford to learn a second language. And we think this is an opportunity to raise awareness, having interns. So I don't think is there a requirement.
No, I mean, it's really up. If you post an internship opportunity on the careers portal, you define what the requirements are. So if you're in a French-speaking country and you want French to be the requirement, but you don't need English, you know, that's what you can do for an internship. So I think there is some flexibility at that level, and it's really for you to.
We have the gender balance.
Yes, exactly.
No,
Travis.
Sure. I just wanted to add to that. I know traditionally that the UNICs have advertised, let's say, on their own websites, etc.
Okay.
However, we are going to the portal in order to standardize the advertisements, and
Through
so
the
so that's something we'll be giving additional advice on how to do that in the future. We have a couple of pilots going on right now, but it will be standardized in the near future.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so Roberta, it's really up to you. There's a question from Mikael in Prague. It would be useful to make the materials available also in a format that is adaptable into other languages. So maybe not in PDF, but if you can send it in a Word or whatever format, then they can change it and adapt it. Yes, yes, that should be possible. Is there from Prosper? Is there a limit of age, or people may apply for jobs at any age? There is a retirement age, so what
I think it's about one. I have to remember. It's it's 1 year too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1 or 2 years before
Yeah, I think
retirement?
there's a limitation right before the retirement age.
Yeah.
I believe it is within 1 year, but we can get back to you and circulate that.
I think you would be expected to take up the functions at least 1 year before the retirement. So you at least serve like a year or two. Yeah.
So Prosper and Brazzaville, we will let you confirm that, yeah? Genevieve in Brussels, when are you going to update the UN Careers website with the information on the YPP 2017?
That's a very good question. The moment we have approval from everybody, which is sometimes hard to achieve. So we have the list of member states, and we are in the process of updating that part. We are still struggling a little bit with the exam areas, but unofficially I can tell you that it will be Polnet, Magnet, and Infonet. So public information will be in there. But for us, it's not only important that we have covered certain exam areas for ourselves or for OHRM. What happens during the exam process is that the exam questions, they need to be created, marked, and the interviews need to be done by experts. And as long as the substantive officers don't come forward to provide us with experts, we cannot guarantee to hold this exam because we cannot do it ourselves. We are not the experts. And this is where we are struggling because everybody is so overly busy nowadays, doing more with less, that it's sometimes hard to squeeze the YPP somewhere in between all those priorities. But I would say that latest in 2-3 weeks we will have all the information online.
But that's sad really because it's not there right now. It's why we decided to already post information on the social media. So if you have interested people, have them refer them to the Careers Facebook, where we also have the video now of Eva actually explaining the YPP for 2017.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. Thank you so much. There are a couple of questions on social media. Amen from Khartoum. He says there are a number of accounts on social media promoting job openings at the UN. What are the main official pages? It would be good to have the list so that we retweet or post. And then there was another question from Rija in Antananarivo, a page on Facebook called Grant Jobs uses UN agency logos. Is it authorized? Probably not, right?
Yeah, it's not authorized, and that brings me to another subject. There are a number of companies that sell success in the YPP exam, and they really look like UN made and UN authorized, and they're not. Whoever takes money for anything that relates to recruitment in the UN is totally illegal. So just for you to know.
Okay, thank you. Mikhail in Prague also is sending us a link to his career material that he translated. So I share that with you later. Thank you for that. And if anyone else has anything to share or is going to translate the new material, please let us know. Karen in Brussels, concerning mobility, will there be any scheme to assist with mobility for chief staff in the future, general service staff?
Well, so the current staff selection system, let me say it like this: the mobility is very important to us as an international organization, and mobility can happen in different ways. Yes, so it can be geographic. It can be changing the department, it can be changing your role, it can be changing your function. The new staffing system, as I explained, the mobility requirement of changing your job periodically to have more movement and knowledge transfer between the different job networks and the different departments is something for the FS&P categories. And that is really to enable mandate delivery and cross-fertilization, and also have staff members who are serving in hardship duty stations to kind of give them more opportunities for career development. the national and general service categories are locally recruited staff. So from the beginning, there's never been an expectation by the organization that there is geographic mobility, for instance. But of course, we do have also general service staff members who apply to different duty stations, as possible, but we don't have a scheme in place. What OHRM proposed to the General Assembly at the last session was to remove the barriers for G staff to apply to P positions, and unfortunately that was turned down by the General Assembly. But I do think there is an intention by sides of DSG to bring this proposal back to the General Assembly again, to just provide greater opportunities. I know, Eva knows more about it. One other option is the G2P, or what is called G2N.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, thank you, Anje, if I may add to that, I think we on the side of OHRM, we are moving a little bit into that direction by having exchanged the ASAT to the GGST. What does GGST stand for? The Global General Service Test. Global means you can take it and then get a job in another duty station because it's the same test all over the world. Whereas the ASAT was really specific to each duty station. So if you wanted to go and work somewhere else, you had to take the test again. So, we're step by step, I think we're moving into the right direction. Also looking at the fact that G positions were originally foreseen only for colleagues who did not go in their education beyond a high school certificate. And if you look at the realities nowadays, we have a lot of staff members who are, so to speak, overqualified and who would maybe be able to do also other jobs, also through geographical mobility. But I think also, on the other hand, we should look at the fact that a lot of people don't want to be geographically mobile. So it's a very fine balance between what some people want and what the others maybe prefer.
Thank you. Maybe if you can just say a line on the G2N exam, because that I think might be of relevance to some of our colleagues.
So depending on how long you have worked in your jobs, you might still remember the predecessor of the YPP, the NCE, which Anja has passed. And it was as difficult. And the difference between the YPP and NCE, amongst other things, was that in former times there were different exams for G2Ps and for externals, and now it's all one exam. So the exam is the same whether you're an external participating or a staff member who wants to move from the G category to the P category. You compete against everybody else. There is no special marking or giving points or any consideration. You have, as a staff member, and who is a staff member in the sense, you have to have a contract with the Secretariat on G level, and national officers, they are considered externals, consultants are considered externals, interns are considered externals. So you have to have a contract with the Secretariat. Also, what happens a lot is that we have staff members who are administered through UNDP or another agency or fund. They're also not considered staff members of the Secretariat, which causes sometimes confusion. So once you are in this category, G, staff, Secretariat, you have two options. You can choose the track G2P, or the track G2N. What's the difference? G2P, there is no age requirement and no nationality requirement. However, if you pass the exam, and when it comes to the selection, there's only 10% of available positions reserved for those colleagues. So only every 10th vacancy will be offered to a G2P successful candidate. If you fall in terms of criteria in the same category as externals, meaning you're not older than 32 years, you have a bachelor's degree, you have the correct nationality, and you speak English or French fluently, then you can apply on the so-called G2N track, and that will put you into the 90% when it comes to the selection if you're successful. Does that clarify?
Yes, yes, that's very interesting.
Hmm.
There's a question which I think when you look at the slide, Rija, in Madagascar, is the UN National Competitive or the YPP exam available in the Africa region? I think you already answered it. There are quite a few countries when you look at the list from the African region.
Yeah.
I guess,
If I may add
Yes.
something to that in terms of availability, I mentioned before the exam centers that we usually open, and we also in this area try to become more modern. We pilot this year. She's laughing. Yeah. We pilot this year an online exam. So one of the exam areas, the Polnet exam, will be online, and we have double-checked beforehand with member state representatives in terms of network capacities in the various countries where one would think that it might be a problem. Everybody has reassured us that it should be okay, so we will try it out and see how it works. So we will have both this year, an online exam in one area and a paper-based exam in two other areas, and then we'll see what the outcome is in terms of who can participate, who will participate, what is the outcome, what are the differences, etc.
Excellent. There were two questions from Wausau and also from Cynthia about whether the mobility management system affects the national information offices, and I think you already answered no. Then quite a few colleagues have sent us links to the material that they have created, Genevieve also in Dutch, English, French. Thank you very much. We will share that. And then there's a question, Mikal, is there any reason to keep the locally recruited staff external for international positions when these may be experienced staff with many years of service?
They are not. I mean, you can, if you're, a national staff member serving in your country, you can apply to. I mean, if you meet the minimum requirements for professional positions, you can apply to the positions, and we would encourage you to do so, especially if you're from a country that's underrepresented. Then you already have the exposure to the UN. You already know a lot of things. You have bachelor's +2 or masters and experience. So it's really about meeting the minimum requirements of positions that you see advertised. And it's not in the same country.
Yes, but they are considered external, and I think
it doesn't really. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't really matter anymore, external, internal, because we used to have the 15, 30, 60 days kind of system where it kind of mattered, but now everyone is considered equally, especially under the new staffing system. A big advantage there is that anyone who is eligible, every single applicant that is eligible is invited to the assessment process. So you don't really have that under the old system. But because we have standardized, more automated assessments, we can absorb larger volumes of applicants. So the minute you meet minimum requirements, also make sure you're suitable, of course. For Polnet and now moving forward for ITechNet, you will be invited to the assessment process. It's anonymous, standardized, everyone's treated equally. It's really merit-based. It doesn't matter your internal, external, your talent matters.
Yeah, can I add something to that? Because I know the recruitment process can be very frustrating for everybody. And I've been in a variety of duty stations, and I know that once you're out of New York, everybody thinks, oh my God, it's headquarters and they have their own thing, and everything there is so much better. And it's not the
They take care of
case.
themselves.
So it's everywhere the same thing. Anje and Helene and I, we apply for dozens or hundreds of posts until we get something new, as any other person would do. When I, as a hiring manager, look at the Inspira profiles, I never look external, internal. It's really just who is the most qualified. And then I think nowadays it's really a matter of being competitive and being the best in the test and the interview. I mean, if I look at Valentin, you cannot see him, but he's a very, very new colleague here. Here he is. He comes from Romania. He joined us very recently from the outside. And he worked in a restaurant before. He has no UN experience, but he has a master's in public administration. He was just excellent in the test, and he was the best in the interview. So it was no matter of anything else but qualifications and maybe the way he knew how to fill his resume, because I really would like to reiterate what Anja said before. We see so many PhDs where people make really simple mistakes, and it's such a pity, and they never realize that they make the same mistake over and over again. So if there is frustration, I would really advise in the first place, have somebody look at the PhD, and even if you send it to colleagues in HR who will point out that, oh, you don't have high school indicated, so Inspira will screen you out if it says high school certificate is a requirement. And then you might say, but I have a bachelor's and a master's, but Inspira doesn't work like that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think you really have to pay attention. And the moment a hiring manager sees mistakes, even if it's just spelling mistakes, it's already a red flag, you know, because it shows you didn't really pay the attention that it deserves. So it's really, and there are, you know, coaching available for PhD writing. So we shared that with you, but we can share it again. So it's very important to pay attention.
One more point also, because I get this question a lot. Is it worthwhile to be on the roster?
Yes, there is actually a question about the roster, if I can just add. Because we have a colleague, Prosper, who has passed the G2B, and he has been on the roster, and he's asking what role is there for OHRM to help, you know, placing colleagues who are on the roster.
Okay, so that's
and then also how long can someone be on the roster was another question.
Okay, so the first one regarding YPP candidates on the roster, we cannot do anything as long as there are no vacant positions. So we really have to wait for vacancies. So unfortunately, there's not much we can help the successful candidates with, except with information, if they need information. In terms of the original answer to the question I usually get, is it worthwhile being on the roster? I just wanted to share another just personal information. I personally have been offered 3 times a job already from the roster through people who never have seen me, who didn't know me, they just saw my profile. They saw I was not on a YPP roster, on regular rosters. But I have to say that it was because of my language skills. I speak 3 of the UN languages, and one of them is rather rare. It's Arabic, so I speak English, French, and Arabic. And it was 2 of those 3 offers were in the field. So you have to be ready and flexible and open to accept job offers that are maybe not your ideal. Some people love to go to the field. Some others might have circumstances that prevent them. But yeah, I think it's useful to be on the roster.
Excellent. Well, we are at 10 o'clock. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to quickly run through, and then we'll have to wrap up. And there are a couple of questions, Accra, that are very specific, I think, to our setting. We will answer them. One is, again, Roberta is leaving, but thank you. She said that they have a note on their website about, you know, no charge of UN employment. So, you know, if that's wonderful. There is a question, Cynthia, can NIO's National Information Offices apply for professional level positions? And you answered that. Yes, you can, but you will be competing, you know, but you can. There is a question from Saman in Dhaka with regards to the 50-50 gender gender parity. If there's a huge difference between the applicants in the quality, etc., what is the UN's rule? Meaning, if I guess what he's trying to say is if maybe the male candidate is better qualified, what
well, I mean, the way we look at it is, I mean, we have a system where we let people go through the process and then they are recommended or not after the interview. So everyone who ends up on a recommended list is fully, you know, functional, can do the job. So at that stage, when we have 6 people on a recommended list, everyone has gone through the same process, everyone can do the job. Then we look at gender and unrepresentation. So the qualification is really in the beginning of the process, because you meet the minimum requirements, you go through the assessment, and then everybody kind of becomes the same at the end. Yeah.
So they have to meet the minimum requirements.
Yeah, everyone's the same. Yeah.
And then also there's a question again from Khartoum, Ayman. The competency-based interview guidance is available on the internet. Is it advisable to share this guidance with external candidates?
Yes, there is also on the careers page, there are 2 links for online learning tools on how to fill your PhD and how to go through a competency-based interview. And I think they're really useful.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe quickly also a question from Prague again. What is the average length of recruitment? You already mentioned, I mean, average, and he says perhaps many of us have experienced that it may take a year or even more. You said ideally,
there's a great kind of disparity between departments, but as we move forward, we're introducing this new staff selection system. It will be a very kind of organized process, and you will know when it starts and when it ends, because it's more administered by the HR teams, the network staffing teams, but so it will change a great deal over the next years in terms of how long recruitments take. So it will be probably about now we have 170 days under the new system, but we have to phase in Infonet as well. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
No, and also because we're more and more using electronic tools.
Exactly, yeah.
So this year also for the YPP, for example, the moment we have an online test, we don't need to ship all the material and wait for the packages to come back. That saves us 4 months, believe it or not. 2 months going there, 2 months coming back from all over the world. And then, it's crazy.
Wow.
And then the interviews we'll do, but we have done them through Skype or GoToMeeting in the past, but we will introduce a new system this year where everything goes into the tool right away, so you don't have to write by hand anymore. You don't have to write it up for any the bodies that check on it afterwards. So there's time efficiency. Then we will go into online proctoring of exams, and because of these automated systems, we'll get the analysis right away instead of us going through lengthy processes. I think that's just it will save time and work, and it will make the process shorter.
And then maybe just 2 last questions. One is Brussels. Why do the same TJOs, temporary job openings, reappear every few months? We know that there are enough candidates. Is it true that it's purely budgetary? Also, successful YPP candidates do not get a place in time. Why encourage others to apply? And then there's another question from Accra. And that's a bit moving across other agencies. Can a staff member take leave without pay and then work for another UN agency?
Okay, should I? The first one, regarding the same job TJOs that appear over and over again. Be careful when you read it. I receive that also a lot, and then I point out to colleagues that look really in which office it is. It has the same functional title, it has the same duration, the same application period, but when you look into the details, you see it's not exactly the same job opening. That's the first thing. The second is that, we have a lot of mobility, and yes, somebody might come on board for 3 months and then go to the next team, and we have to figure out how to find a replacement. And then that, there's a shift between the teams, and then sometimes a job opening is made for the bigger office, but then there is internal mobility, and then another team would take that person. You see, it's and it's really, what do? We try to find people who can do the jobs, and it's not about cheating on anybody. And we are really sometimes desperate to have every position filled so that the work can be done in time. And then the second question was
leave without pay to work for another agency. Yeah, leave without pay.
So,
leave without pay.
as far as I know, the official rule is you cannot take leave without pay in order to work for an agency. You can take leave without pay for certain personal circumstances, and if it happens then that you get a job in another, like for example, you move to take care of your mother, and then she gets better, but you are still on leave without pay. You find a job. Most probably OHRM will accept that because they want you to feel good as a staff member and have opportunities. But I don't think there's a rule that says you can take especially without pay in order to get a job somewhere else.
It's a little bit for the professional staff. We have an interagency agreement. So you apply to a job in UNICEF, you get the job, you may request for a lien or for some other arrangement. Yeah, so it's not really connected to especially without pay.
Yeah.
So maybe look at the interagency agreements on kind of staff mobility within the UN system.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was another question in between. So we had.
As successful YPP candidates, if successful YPP candidates do not get places in time, why encourage others to apply? And then also, somehow related, but not to the YPP, how long can a person stay on the roster? Is it possible to extend the stay? And I think this is in general the roster. I don't think related to the YPP.
Okay, but it's good that this question came because right now in December, the General Assembly approved the extension of the YPP rosters. So before we had a 2-year roster and now we have a 3-year roster, meaning also all rosters that exist already for the YPP. So that's a good thing. And why, the question is why get new ones on board if the old ones don't get placed? There's a twofold answer to that. One is that people often get placed but not on YPP posts. And then the statistic looks bad, but in reality, the candidates got the job they wanted because they, for example, took the exam in administration, but they really wanted to work in public administration, and they got a temporary assignment there. And when we asked them, there's a vacancy now in HR, do you want to come? They say, no, I'm so happy in public information. So officially they're still on our list because they didn't go to a YPP position, but in reality they are in the UN system. So that's one part of the answer. The other part is that how do we create the roster? We try to foresee the future, which obviously is very hard. We try to foresee how many vacant positions will we have during the next 2-3 years, and we do this on the basis of past patterns, and we do this by approaching the individual offices, asking them, do you think your P2 will move on and make place for a new P2? And mistakes can be made in such a system, and sometimes the roster is depleted right away because there are lots of vacancies, and sometimes it just doesn't happen because the former P2s didn't move on, or for whatever other reason. There have been offices in the past who had to cut posts, budget cuts, and where do they cut first? It's the P2 level. So things change. But having said so, the NCE process was the opposite. Everybody who passed the exam was on the roster, and then people stayed there forever. And this is where member states complained because they said, my people are on the roster and they don't get a job, so we have to change the system. And we make shorter rosters, very specific number of roster places, and then we start the process from anew to give other underrepresented countries a new chance.
Excellent. Okay, I know there's still 2 more questions. These are the last ones. Karen in Brussels says, I'm on the roster for chief staff. What are the benefits of being on this roster if there's no geographic mobility? I'm not sure I understand, but you might.
Well, if you're on a roster, you can be offered a position, but as opposed to when you're at the P level, where you are an internationally recruited staff member, which is different from being a locally recruited staff member, you will not be traveled you will not receive the same kind of entitlement or arrangement if you kind of take such a position. So, I mean, Travis knows that better. So it would be on your own. If you offered a position in New York, then it's really up to you how you get there, because you were not internationally recruited in the first place. Another option, of course, is the FS level in the field. I mean, if you're up for that, I would try that to, work again in the field, maybe go to the FS higher level, that's P equivalent, and then maybe try to make a move into the professional level. But, it's not always like a direct way. It's always like the 6 degrees of separation to get where you want to be. So.
And then the last question from Evelyn saying, if staff are overqualified, what should they do? I think you already also answered before, but
yeah, that's a good question. I think what you should do is be happy in your job. And if you feel that you're happy, then it's fine that you're overqualified. If you feel that you're not happy, you should apply for a job for which you feel you would be better qualified, as simple as that. And if you feel that this option is only to move from the G to the P category, either go through the GD to NOG to P or apply for agency funds posts, because they don't make the distinction. When you come from our side as a G staff, you can apply for P positions there. I think that's a very good option.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so very much. This was really, really interesting. As Eva said, we learned a lot. I mean, things are changing, and with the YPP, but with the whole recruitment and mobility. So I think this was very useful for us individually, and I hope for you individually. And there were lots of questions, I think, for you individually, but also for you to explain better, what the UN is looking for to manage expectations. I think that's a big takeaway, that we don't overpromise, but that it is competitive, but there are many venues, and that it might not be always, and that's always something I mentioned to the young people. Don't expect you come out of college or university and you will get a job. Build your career, work for an NGO, work for the private sector, work for the government, whatever, but have it as part of your plan. So I think that's very useful. And also that we have now these contacts, these valuable contacts. So if you have questions specifically, I'm sure Anja and Eva will be happy to answer. And if you do go to these career fairs or have events where you speak or present, be in touch with them, because that they could have valuable information for you and messages specifically to your region. So let's be more strategic about it. But thank you very, very much, Eva, Anja, and the whole team. Congratulations, Valentin. And thank you very much to all of you for your interest and for continuing to help us to spread the word.
Yeah, if I may add to this, we were really, really happy, because you said that having us as a contact, we are so happy to have you as a contact, because as far as we might seem away, you are far for us as well. So we are really, really happy to have your names and to know to whom to reach out when we have questions and when we have when we need help. So thanks for participating today. And on the 2nd of May, we'll have another session, especially on the YPP. But obviously, if you then have questions on general HR questions, we will be happy to answer that as well. And I'm looking forward to closer cooperation.
Great. Well,
thank you
Helene. Very much. Thank you very much to everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to some of us, Saman. Goodbye.